The rain poured in relentless sheets, a curtain of water that blurred the towering gates and marble facade of Victor Harlow's estate. He sat stiffly in the back of his car, the leather interior cocooning him from the storm outside, the muted hum of the engine drowning out the distant rumble of thunder. He was thinking about the gala he had just left, how he had smiled through champagne toasts, endured shallow conversations about mergers and market trends, and posed for pictures beside men and women who measured life in shares and acquisitions. All of it felt routine, mechanical, as though he were an actor endlessly repeating lines on a stage. When the car turned into the circular driveway, the headlights cut across the wet stone steps leading up to the mansion's grand doors. At first, Victor thought he saw shadows, perhaps leaves blown down from the ancient oaks that lined the property. But then the light lingered, illuminating something that made his chest tighten. Two figures lay crumpled at the base of the steps, their bodies bent against one another, barely distinguishable beneath the rain that soaked their clothes. "Stop the car," Victor said sharply. The driver, startled, braked immediately. The millionaire leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't debris. It wasn't shadows. It was people. He stepped out before the driver could open his door. The cold rain assaulted him instantly, plastering his neatly combed hair to his forehead, soaking his tailored tuxedo within seconds. But he hardly noticed. His gaze remained fixed on the couple sprawled in the downpour. They were elderly, their bodies trembling violently with each shiver, as if their bones themselves were rattling under the strain of the storm. The man, his hair silver and thin, struggled weakly to lift his head. He tried to shield the woman pressed against him, though his arms looked far too frail for the task. The woman's face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, her eyelids fluttering like someone fighting to stay conscious. Her thin coat clung to her small frame, offering no protection from the torrent. Victor's breath caught in his throat. He had seen beggars on city streets, had passed them in his luxury cars without sparing more than a glance, had brushed them off when they approached with trembling hands. But this was on his doorstep. On his immaculate property that boasted wealth beyond imagination, two lives were withering under the sky, as though the universe itself had placed them there to shatter his indifference. He crouched down, his knees sinking into the puddles, the chill seeping into his bones. "Sir, ma'am," his voice was urgent, stripped of its usual commanding tone. The man's eyes, clouded and weary, flickered open. "Please," he rasped, barely audible over the rain. We needed to rest. I didn't want her to die out there." His words broke into coughing, his thin frame convulsing. Victor swallowed hard, a lump rising in his throat. The woman stirred faintly, whispering something incoherent, her body trembling violently against the old man's chest. Victor reached out without hesitation, steadying her with one hand. Her skin was icy, her pulse weak beneath his touch. "Help me," Victor shouted over his shoulder to the driver, who was already rushing toward him, umbrella useless in the storm. Together, they tried to lift the couple. The old man resisted weakly at first, mumbling about not wanting to be a burden, but his strength was too far gone to continue. His arms sagged, his head falling forward as Victor and the driver gently hoisted him to his feet. Victor's heart pounded, his expensive shoes slipping on the slick stone as he bore the weight of the frail woman. She was so light in his arms, as though life itself was barely clinging to her. The contrast pierced him. Here he was, a man who owned industries, towers of glass and steel that touched the clouds, yet this tiny woman, fragile and fading, seemed more valuable than anything he had ever built. As lightning split the sky and thunder roared, Victor felt something stir within him that he hadn't felt in years, a raw, aching urgency to save someone, not for profit, not for appearance, but because it was the right thing, the only thing, to do. The grand double doors of the mansion loomed above, the warm light spilling faintly from the glass panels, waiting. Victor glanced at the man still clinging to consciousness, at the woman cradled in his arms, and made a silent vow. Whatever had brought them to his doorstep tonight, whatever cruel twist of fate had left them shivering in the storm, he would not let them slip away. Not here, not now. The rain beat harder, but Victor no longer noticed. All that mattered was getting them inside, to warmth, to safety, to life. The heavy doors of the mansion swung open, groaning against the wind as a rush of warm air spilled out into the storm. Victor and his driver carried the elderly couple inside, their soaked clothes dripping onto the marble floor. The sudden shift from the freezing rain to the glowing interior of the grand hall felt surreal, as though Victor had just stepped between two worlds, one of desperation and another of excess. The opulent chandeliers sparkled overhead, the polished gold accents gleamed, and the echo of dripping water clashed with the hushed gasps of the staff who came rushing at the sight. "Blankets! Quickly!" Victor barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "And hot water. Call the doctor now." He lowered the frail woman onto the velvet sofa nearest the roaring fireplace, the driver helping the old man into a chair beside her. The staff, long accustomed to Victor's commands about business dinners or arranging banquets, had never seen their master like this, disheveled, drenched, his tuxedo clinging to him, but with eyes that burned with something unfamiliar, fear. The butler returned moments later, arms loaded with woolen blankets. A maid rushed in with steaming towels. Victor took the first blanket himself, wrapping it tightly around the woman's trembling body, then guided the old man's hands under another. The fire crackled louder, its warmth beginning to push back the chill that clung to the air. Still, the woman's lips quivered, her eyelids fluttering as if her body fought against slipping further away. The old man tried to speak, his voice hoarse and uneven. We didn't mean to disturb. We thought the porch would keep the rain off her." His words trailed into a cough that rattled his chest. "Quiet," Victor said softly, almost pleading. "Save your strength. You're safe now." He surprised even himself with the gentleness in his tone. He pulled a stool close to the sofa and sat near the woman, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. The staff moved quickly under his orders. Hot broth was brought in, tea prepared, and fresh linens laid out should they need them. Victor, however, hardly noticed the bustle. His focus was locked on the two lives that now seemed so fragile, so desperately in need of care. He was a man who had once believed money solved everything, yet as he sat there, all his fortune felt powerless unless he used it to keep them alive. Within 20 minutes, the doctor arrived, his medical bag clicking open as he set it on the low table. He moved swiftly, checking pulses, shining a small light into their eyes, pressing his stethoscope against damp chests. Victor hovered nearby, his jaw tight, as though bracing himself for the verdict. "They're weak from exposure," the doctor said finally, his voice calm. "But firm. Hypothermia, exhaustion, nothing beyond repair, but they need warmth, fluids, rest, and good food." If they had stayed out there much longer, he left the sentence unfinished, but the weight of it hung heavy in the room. Victor exhaled sharply, relief mingling with dread at what could have been. He turned to his butler. "Prepare the East Wing guest rooms. Fireplaces lit, beds warmed. Have meals prepared, soups, porridge, whatever they can manage. And stay nearby in case they need anything at all." As the orders were carried out, Victor remained seated by the sofa, his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the couple. The woman stirred faintly, her lips moving without sound before she settled again. The old man had slipped into an uneasy sleep, his hands still clasping hers, knuckles pale with the effort of holding on even in unconsciousness. That sight, a simple gesture of devotion, struck Victor deeper than any moment in recent memory. He leaned back, running a hand through his damp hair. The storm outside raged on, rain hammering against the tall windows, thunder rolling across the hills. Yet here, inside, another storm had taken root in his chest. For years, his life had been measured in profits, contracts, and victories over competitors. He had believed his mansion was a fortress, a world sealed away from the struggles that plagued the streets he sped past in his limousine. And yet, here lay the truth: two souls, nearly extinguished, had crossed his threshold without knocking, without asking, and had awakened something he thought long dead. Victor realized then that this wasn't just coincidence. He felt as though fate had dragged them to his door, shattering his detachment, forcing him to confront the fragility of life beyond the walls of wealth. He glanced at his hands, hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, hands that now trembled slightly because they had carried a woman whose entire existence might have ended unnoticed in the storm. He looked back at the couple, the firelight painting their faces in shades of gold and shadow. For the first time in decades, Victor felt a strange, humbling truth: all his empire, all his riches, meant nothing if he couldn't use them to protect lives as precious and fleeting as the ones resting before him. The mansion was no longer silent and cold. It was alive, with warmth, with urgency, with meaning. And deep inside Victor, a vow formed quietly, stronger than any contract he had ever signed: these two would not be the last lives he would fight for. They had been brought to his door for a reason, and he would never again ignore what he was meant to do.